Thank you very, very much for that warm welcome. I feel it is a real privilege and an honour to be here, and I would like to thank Rolf von Dick and the Centre for Leadership and Behaviour in Organisations and Sparda Bank and Herr Weber for inviting me to speak here today. And most of all, I'd like to thank you for giving me the honour of speaking with you and the honour of allowing me to influence maybe your thinking about how we develop and how we nurture really effective organizations. So from my heart, thank you very much indeed for inviting me. What I thought... Thank you.
Is the microphone on?
How's that?
Okay.
Okay? Can you hear me? Can you hear me at the back? Yeah, it's okay. So what I would like to do is to take some of your time to talk about these topics. I want to talk about how we create really effective organizations. And I think that the starting place has to be what the organization is for. So we have to be focused on customers, and that's, I think, the first issue. And then to talk about, okay, but what beyond that in order to ensure that we can be really effective? And I think it's to do with ensuring that within organizations we have really clear goals at every level, from the top management team down through departments, down through teams, down to the individuals within the teams, that there are aligned objectives at every level so that we all know what it is we're required to do. I think we also need really good people management, and it's an easy phrase to trot out, but many organizations, unlike Sparda Bank, don't provide training. They don't have satisfied groups of employees. And good people management, I think, is about making sure that people are clear about what it is they're required to do at work, and making sure that they feel valued and respected and supported within the organization. And I think for me it's also about creating a situation where employees feel engaged, that there is a sense of engagement and vigor and dedication and pride in what they do, both in relation to their individual work, but also in how they interact with the organization that they're part of. And part of my thinking about this is that organizations, I believe, are simply another form of human communities, just like a village or a voluntary society or even a family. It's a form of human community, and we have to understand them as human communities in order to ensure that they're most effective. I think also, when you listen to the quotation that Rolf read out about our early history, that teamwork has been part of our history throughout our evolution, and we have to harness the energy of teamwork within modern organizations, and I believe that we are very often failing to do that, and I want to challenge some of the ideas we have about team working in organizations. And finally, to talk about really that I think if we are going to create effective human communities, that our leaders must embody the values that are fundamental to effective communities, that we need to lead from a value base first and foremost, rather than from an abstract intellectual conception of what leadership is about. So I want to check, have you come to the right meeting? Yeah? Okay. Let me begin by sharing with you some of my prejudices about what leadership is about. First, I think that leadership is about searching for new ways to add value for customers. And I'm sure you will all agree with that. But I think that when we think about it, means a lot for our individual behaviors. It means that we have to remember as leaders what we are here for, and that we think about almost every hour, every day, every week, how can I add value for customers? How can I ensure that the teams I lead are adding value for customers? Rather than engaging in lots of other activities which feel like they're leadership or feel like they're important things we should be doing at work, but are not maybe making any difference at all to customers' experience. And that, I think, requires us to remember that we are leaders every day, every hour, every week, to remember that we're in a leadership position. And second, I think what's important from a leader is to be optimistic and confident that there's no problem that can't be solved, no status quo that can't be bettered. Because if we as leaders are not optimistic and confident about the changes that we can bring about, then surely the people we lead will not be confident either. And that, again, I think, requires us to be aware. So when I, as a leader, come into the workplace on a Monday morning, maybe not having slept well or whatever, and I feel tired, and I know that I feel tired and down, that's what I know. But the people that I lead think, what have I done wrong that he is in this bad mood? So it is about, again, although we agree with ideas like this, it's about remembering that we are leaders every day and remembering to play that role really effectively and genuinely. And the third is about really, I think the role of a leader is to really try to understand what customers want. And again, this is a phrase I'm sure none of you would disagree with. The role of leaders is to really listen to customers. But what does it mean? Let me give you an example. This morning, I'm leaving, let's say, to get to the airport, get in my car, get to the airport, come to this really prestigious meeting. And I'm very anxious, I want to be on time, I want it to all go perfectly, and I have a flat tire in my car. And so I change the tire and I go very quickly to the tire repair place. What is it down the road? Pit stop, I think. What is it that I want from them? Sorry? Change my tire? Mobility, yeah? A solution? Low price? Quick. Yes, please. A good coffee, that would be nice. Yeah, that would be really nice. I want them to understand that, maybe some empathy because I'm feeling very tense. Maybe some foot massage even, would be really nice. Yeah. Do you know what I would really like is if they would fix it so I never have a flat tire again. That would be great, because it seems such a crazy thing to happen, and it's so disruptive. My hands are covered in dirt and all the rest. Please fix it so I never have a flat tire again. So when we talk about listening to customers, from a leadership perspective, it seems to me to really think deeply about how could we make a big difference. And by the way, I gave this example last week to a group of people, and somebody put their hand up and said, this is totally unrealistic. And then somebody else put their hand up and said, I have a RAV4 car and the tires don't go flat because they fixed it so it doesn't happen. So do you know what I mean about thinking really, really creatively and differently? And the final point is that I think leadership is about doing the difficult rather than managing the inevitable. So it's thinking about what is really going to make a difference to the effectiveness of this organization. What is it that I need to spend my time doing that's really going to shift the organization in the direction we need to go, rather than what we can all spend our time doing as leaders, which is to go to lots of meetings and to do lots of emails and send lots of other emails. What is it that I can do that will really shift the needle? And again, I think that what that requires, all of these things require, is, if you like, mindfulness of remembering that I'm in a leadership role every hour, every day, every week, every month, and thinking about what do I need to be focusing on, how do I need to be behaving in order to make a difference for the organization. Does that make sense? Yeah? So, for me, that's all about people. It's about how we work as leaders in our relationships with people. And I want to really demonstrate from our research evidence, and Rolf was talking about the importance of research evidence guiding our thinking. And for me, one of the most exciting periods of my professional life, probably the most exciting period was when I, as a psychologist, came together to work with a group of really strange individuals called economists. Do you know? And I laughed too, actually. Yes. and it was just incredibly exciting because my ideas were challenged, and I had to think in completely different ways and communicate in different ways. And I worked with these economists at an institution called the Centre for Economic Performance at the London School of Economics, and we conducted a 10-year study of 160 manufacturing organisations across the United Kingdom, interviewing senior managers, the chief executive every 2 years, surveying the staff, gathering data on financial performance, innovation, and so on. And what we discovered was that the best predictor that we could find of future productivity was basically the satisfaction levels of the employees. So, of course, there were other factors, but really what mattered was how satisfied, on average, the employees were across the organisation. So, as Herr Weber said, you know, where you have a generally satisfied workforce, you can almost, in a sense, guarantee the likelihood that your company will do well. And when we looked at the management practices that really made a difference to performance, we found, in terms of emphasis, that again it was human resource management practices, the extent of human resource management practices and the sophistication of those practices which predicted the subsequent productivity of the companies as we followed them through over time. We then decided to extend our work to look at the service sector and to take the biggest set of organisations in, I think in Europe, in the English National Health Service, 1.4 million employees. And we looked at 61 hospitals in terms of their performance in delivering care for patients. And what we found was that, again, measuring the human resource management practices in the organisation, that gave us the very best predictor that we could find of patient deaths, of patient mortality. We could account for nearly 17 to 18% of the variation between hospitals in levels of patient deaths on the basis of a knowledge of how they managed people within the organisation. This was a better predictor than the number of doctors per 100 beds, a better predictor than family doctor facilities per 100,000 population, a better predictor than the profile of diseases which people attended the hospital with. And even taking account of the prior mortality data in hospitals, we could still account for about 8% of the variation between hospitals in patient mortality. If those relationships are causal, then we could say that by increasing if those relationships are causal, if we could train 25% more of those who do appraisals in how to have effective appraisal conversations, that would be associated with 12% of the number of deaths after admission for hip fractures. More people working in teams, 25% more people working in teams, would be associated with 7% of the total number of deaths following emergency surgery. Somebody said recently, well, 7% isn't very much. And of course the answer is, if you're one of the 7%, it's quite a lot, actually. Yeah. We've just finished some new analysis, and I think the new analysis has really struck me in terms of what it tells us about the value chain in terms of how we manage staff and what effect that has on service receivers, customers or patients. And this is data from the National Staff Survey of staff in the United Kingdom in the health service, 1.4 million of them, and we have surveyed them every year for the last 8 years. And what we've been able to do is to link the data from those surveys to data on patient satisfaction gathered from patients right across the United Kingdom, from all not just hospitals, but all healthcare organisations. And what we find is that staff views of their leaders is strongly related to patients' perceptions of of quality of care. So when staff have positive views of their leaders, patients are much more positive about the care they receive. They say they are communicated with, they're treated with respect, they're treated with dignity, they're given privacy, and so on. Staff satisfaction and commitment directly predict patient satisfaction. There's a clear relationship between them. Supportiveness of the first line manager or one's immediate managers is also related to positive feelings, and that too predicts patient satisfaction. Remember, we're talking about 400 organizations, 1.3 million people, and these results are aggregated across, and the patient satisfaction surveys are conducted in every organization in the country. Poor staff well-being, work-related stress is associated with a low patient satisfaction, poor quality of care as determined by the regulators of our healthcare system, as well as poorer financial performance. And you can see that the best predictor that we found of patient mortality was the percentage of staff working in well-structured teams. And we can show that by increasing the number of when healthcare organizations, hospitals increase the number of staff working in real teams, the mortality rate subsequently goes down. And this is controlling for other factors like organizational climate indicators and so on. Moreover, those working in well-structured teams are less stressed. And in fact, we find there are lower levels of violence against people working in well-functioning teams. 1 in 7 people in the United Kingdom Health Service is assaulted by a member of the public every year, physically assaulted. So it's a big issue. Where staff have opportunities to influence changes at work, then you have lower patient mortality. And I think it's because where we're listening to our frontline staff, where we're listening to what they have to say, then we're more likely to find out ways that we can improve the way we deliver services. It just makes sense because they are at the front line. Moreover, staff receiving well-structured appraisals is associated with lower patient mortality. And when there's a positive culture, generally we see low levels of mortality and they're declining. We find relationships with financial performance. Financial performance is in decline where staff see lots of errors, where they feel under pressure, and where there's little scope for learning and training. So, the commitment that Herr Weber described of the bank to training of the staff makes sense in terms of the kind of findings that we're getting. So, what we begin to see is an overall picture of good staff management is associated with the outcomes that we would want from service organizations. What's happening in practice is that we also see that absenteeism in the National Health Service in the United Kingdom is costing an enormous amount. 10.3 million working days lost every year. The average number of days taken by somebody working in the health service is 10.7, compared with the public sector of 6.4. It's a huge difference. So if we could reduce that difference, we could save a great deal of money. And as you know, the public services in the United Kingdom are currently under huge pressure. British Telecom and Royal Mail achieved 30 to 40% reductions over the last couple of years. And British Telecom is not the easiest organisation to manage, and Royal Mail has been probably the most unionised organisation in the United Kingdom, but still they managed to reduce absenteeism by 30 to 40%. And you can see the kind of financial figures that we're talking about here. Why do people take time off work? Well, presenteeism. People are attending work when they don't feel well because they don't want to let down patients and they don't want to let down their colleagues at work, and they get more ill and then they have to take a great deal of time off. 1 in 7 staff report being mobbed or bullied by their managers or their colleagues, and we know that from Professor Zapp's work has a huge impact on their well-being and their physical health over time. And so if we could begin to address some of these issues, particularly, for example, the health and well-being of our staff, we could make great savings. For me, one of the great ironies of the health service is that here is a service, an organisation that is seeking to deliver good health and good care for people, but is not actually caring for the health and well-being of those who are required to give the care. And those sorts of contradictions within organizational cultures, I think, are very powerful in undermining the effectiveness of organizations. The best predictor that we can find in our data of the overall performance of healthcare organizations is staff engagement. It predicts both individual outcomes like satisfaction and health and commitment, but it also predicts organizational outcomes like financial performance, mortality, and so on. And certainly what's emerging from studies in many countries is the importance of engaging staff, ensuring that they're engaged in the work that they do, motivated by the work that they do, and that they feel a sense of pride about their organizations, a sense of loyalty to their organizations, a sense of identity with the purpose of those organizations, of what they're trying to achieve. And for me, one of the really most pressing questions is how we can increase levels of employee engagement. Not just because we want to, sweat the assets of the organization and derive every bit of effort we can from the people who work within those organizations, but because we know that when staff and employees are engaged, they too benefit in terms of their quality of life. One of the key ways that we can promote employee engagement is very, very simple, but it is so profound that I think we overlook it. And if psychology has made an important contribution in the last 15 years to our understanding, it is a recognition that emotion plays an absolutely fundamental role in human experience. So, we know, for example, that the level of positive emotion that people experience predicts longevity, predicts their how long they live for. And the difference can be as much as 10 years between those who experience high levels of positivity and those who experience low levels of positivity. We know that you can predict a person's income at age 26 from the level of positive emotion at age 18. We know that if you induce positive emotion in a 3-year-old, they produce more creative paintings. And if you induce positive emotion in a 3-year-old, they're much more likely to behave cooperatively and altruistically with other children. We know that if you induce positive emotion in 83-year-olds, you see the same effects. Creative thinking, cooperative and altruistic behavior. We know that you can predict relationship outcome from the ratio of positive and negative interactions between the partners in a relationship. We know that you can predict the financial performance of top management teams in the banking sector from the ratio of positive to negative interaction during meetings, about 5-1. So keep a count in the meetings and throw in a few extra positives if it's getting out of kilter. Negative emotion is really important in human behavior. We need to be angry, we need to be afraid at times to survive. But what the research evidence is suggesting is that there is an important ratio that we need to get right. And the actual the absolute minimum seems to be about 3-1. We need to be having at least 3 positive experiences to every 1 experience. And if you want to explore this more, you can go to the website of Professor Barbara Fredrickson at the University of Michigan, which provides a lot more of the information about the research on all of this and allows you to assess your own levels of positive affectivity as well. You can also have too much of a good thing. And 11-1 seems to be where it starts to become aversive. I'm not quite sure why, but anyway, it is. You can have too much of a good thing. So, sorry?
He has that every Friday.
I said I have that every Friday.
Too much of a good thing on a Friday, yeah. If we want to create engagement within our organizations, we have to create environments where people, by and large, feel positive. So we need to make sure that we're providing appreciation and recognition and support and that people have fun. Rolf referred to my period working in the coal mines. Let's not romanticize working in a coal mine. They are horrible environments. But what made it so manageable was the wonderful humor and wit of the people who worked underground, and the fact that everybody took care of each other's safety first and foremost, that made it possible to work within such a hostile environment. Did you know, oh yes, I should say, I don't mean happiness. Do you know? For me, this is not about leaders being happy people. It's about us as leaders being real, being genuine in our behaviors, being open to people, situations, being curious, wanting to learn, wanting to understand, being kind to people, having an orientation of kindness, and being appreciative. So being real, being open, being curious, being kind, and being appreciative. Not some fake happiness that involves, jumping on the table and clapping one's hands and clicking one's heels or whatever. Did you know that... well, let me share another result with you first before I go on and talk about relationships. When we did the manufacturing study, we interviewed the CEOs every 2 years for about 2 hours. And in a subsequent piece of research with colleagues at Rice University in Texas, we at random took 4 one-minute segments from those interviews. Do you understand? So at random, we took 4 one-minute segments from those tape-recorded interviews, and we counted the number of positive statements that the CEOs made. The number of positive statements predicted company climate as measured by employee opinion surveys a year later, which in turn predicted productivity. And the point of this is that we human beings catch emotions off each other far quicker and more easily than we would ever catch the cold virus or flu or whatever. We are acute to each other's emotions. We are so vigilant about each other's emotions, but we are particularly powerfully acute to the emotions of our leaders, wanting to see what their emotional state is. So how leaders behave is particularly powerful in influencing the emotional environment within an organization. So as leaders, we bear a particular responsibility in terms of our behaviors and the choices we make about how we behave and how we engage with people. You are more likely to die from loneliness than you are from the effects of smoking and obesity combined. You're more likely to die from loneliness than you are from the effects of smoking and obesity combined. If you're lonely and you smoke and you're overweight, you're in deep trouble. But relationships at work matter. And where you see chronic conflict within the workplace, where there are long-term conflicts between individuals, that damages those individuals and it damages the people around them. Now, transient conflicts are of course not a problem. My daughters have arguments at the dinner table many evenings of the week, and then 10 minutes later they're curled up on the couch with their arms around each other watching television. That's the nature of families and communities. It's when the conflicts are particularly intense, when they're particularly chronic, that they damage human health and well-being. And part of our responsibilities as leaders, I believe, is to intervene in conflicts within organizations that are becoming chronic and that are affecting the performance of the organization. And a lot of the way that we can really, I think, make a difference as leaders is to use appreciation and positive feedback to people on a continual basis. That we almost can't do enough of giving people appreciation if it's done genuinely. By that I mean, it's not going and saying, "Great job, thanks a lot," and moving on. It's saying, that was a very difficult meeting. There were some very different positions, and you took the time to summarize the different positions really carefully and really effectively. And that helped, I think, us all move forward. So thank you very much for doing that. Do you know what I mean? In terms of giving appreciation. And I believe that when we do that as leaders, it creates a ripple effect through the whole organization, which affects the emotional environment. What else do we need to do to build engagement? We need to give people these sorts of leadership and management behaviors, the information they need, the learning opportunities that Herr Weber talked about are absolutely critical, feedback to people building confidence, supporting them to innovate. You know, so many organizations I go to, there is a value expressed in the company mission statement about encouraging innovation, but when you talk to employees, they tell you the story of when they try something out, they get their heads whacked for not doing things in a standard way. Leaders who value, respect and support them. And it's about building a culture of trust. It's about ensuring that when leaders espouse certain values, when they say what matters in the organization, people are our most important asset, that it actually translates into behavior. Because when leaders make promises about their behaviors and then don't fulfill them, it undermines the trust in the organization. And trust, I think, is fundamental to engagement and to community. Making sure that the criteria for recruitment and promotion mirror what we say about the organization's aims. So if great customer service is the value, then we should be promoting people and recruiting people who give great customer service rather than who spend their time flattering the leader. Flat hierarchies and having lots of celebrations of accomplishment seem really important, and ensuring that the focus of the organization's systems is on meeting customers' needs, because people at work want to give great customer service. I don't think anyone wants to come to work and give bad service to customers. But when they're forced into a situation where they can't give service because of the way the organization runs, it undermines engagement. Now, Rolf referred to the work that I've been doing on team working, and the fact that we have been working in teams for the last 150,000 years. Until 200 years ago, out of that 150,000 years, until 200 years ago, there were probably only 2 or 3 organizations in this country, or virtually any other country, bigger than about 30 people. Until 200 years ago, most people, all their lives, worked in groups of 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7, maximum 30, apart from the religious and the military. And yet in the last 200 years, we've created these big organizations. Even this bank, which is a small bank of 480 people, is far bigger than people would have been used to 200 years ago. And I believe that we are uniquely developed to work as teams, we human beings. And the challenge for us is to recreate team working within the context of modern organizations. And on the whole, I think we fail to achieve that. And I want to suggest some practical ways that I think we can harness the power of team working within modern organizations rather than simply espousing the rhetoric of team working. So, I think team-based working is a philosophy about saying, let's use teams as the way we deliver services for those that we serve, our customers, to ensure that decisions are made at the closest possible point to the customer rather than at the top of the organization. And I think there are 4 ways that we need to do this. The first is that we need to really understand what a team is about. I believe a team is not first and foremost about people. A team is first and foremost about a task. So if I need to push a very big boulder up a hill that I can't possibly push by myself, then I need a set of skills, strength, I need coordination, I need persistence to help me get that boulder up the hill. So I need to select people with those skills to get the boulder at the top of the hill. I don't want people who are going to give up halfway and the boulder roll back down. So I think we begin with a task that needs a team to do it. But often what we do in organizations, we say, this group of people works in X department, we'll call them a team. This group of people works in a particular office area, we'll call them a team. And that, I think, creates the conditions for dangerous practice within organizations. So there needs to be a real team task. Second, it needs to be bounded. What does that mean? My colleagues at Harvard, Ruth Wagaman and Richard Hackman, did a study of 120 of the top companies in the States, and they interviewed the CEO to ask the CEO who was in the team. And you can see that in this case, the CEO said there were 11 members in the team, and the CEO named them. The members said anything between 7 and 84 people. In this team, the CEO said 5, and the members said anything between 5 and 9. Only 11 out of the 120 agreed on who was in the team. And they happen to be the top performing companies. And when you think about it, if you don't know who's in the team, how do you know who to communicate with? How do you know who to share information with? And so, my experience, I don't know whether you share this, is that when you ask people who is in their team, you get as many answers generally as the number of people that you ask. So how can we have effective teams when people don't know who's actually in the team in the first place? Second is, we need to make sure that team size is appropriate. And the research evidence from many studies in experiments and in the field in psychology suggests you need the minimum number of people to enable you to do the job effectively. If you have too many people pushing the boulder, it becomes a disaster. So the minimum number of people necessary to do the job effectively, and no more than about 8 or 9. No more than about 8 or 9. Once it gets above about 8 or 9, people have trouble communicating effectively, working interdependently, and you see in team meetings it becomes a broadcast rather than a discussion. I go to organizations in the health service where we are presented with teams of 40. These are not teams, it's crowd control. And it's the research evidence we have is it's not just an issue of naming. It is dangerous because we see higher levels of injuries, higher levels of errors, and higher levels of mortality the more pseudo teams there are in an organization. The second point is about having a clear team purpose. From our work with teams, what seems really critical is that every team should have 5 or 6 or 7 clear objectives. And those objectives, when I say clear, they should be challenging, because unless objectives are challenging, they're not motivating. They should be agreed by the team, and ideally, they should be measurable as well. So we need to be able to measure whether they've been accomplished. Clear, challenging, agreed, and measurable. And we find that the very best predictor of team effectiveness in all of our studies is the clarity of objectives that teams have. And that also means having a really clear team purpose, of there being a valued purpose that the team has that creates a sense of identity and pride in the team. So just to give you some examples about what the compelling purpose might be for a top management team in an organization, it might well cover these sorts of issues in terms of the strategy, acquiring and deploying capital, and so on. Integrating major acquisitions are the sorts of areas that a top management team might be looking at in terms of compelling purpose and objectives. And these were the objectives from the business school that I had the privilege of leading. So we tried to set very clear objectives, and we used those objectives as the agenda for our meetings. So the agenda was simply the objectives. Occasionally we added other bits, but it ensured that we were focused on what we thought were the important issues to do. We also agreed some norms of behavior as a team. 3 things we must always do, and 3 things we must never do, in order to, in some sense, make explicit the values that we held about working together, to do with providing leadership, encouraging innovation, and sharing responsibility for decisions, and ensuring that we weren't misleading each other, and ensuring that we didn't neglect promoting from and learning from the wider organisation of which we were a part. I hope, by the way, that it will be possible to make available the slides for you if you would be interested to have access to them. For a top management team, I think it's really important to express what the values and norms of the team will be around issues to do with commitment and transparency. Commitment is important in a top management team because there's the danger that the individuals in the top management team represent their areas rather than take collective responsibility for the organisation's functioning. And certainly I've seen that at the senior level within higher education settings, that very often top management team members are concerned with fighting for their corner rather than helping the whole organisation to work effectively. And it's about transparency, participation, really being involved and taking responsibility, integrity in terms of how we support our colleagues, and again, clarity of objectives. The third point about creating effective teams, I think, is making sure that we have the right people on the team. Given we've got a boulder, we need strength, we need persistence, we need cooperation. We've got to have the right skills. And that means ensuring that we've got people who don't stand idly by, because we know from lots of work in social psychology that if people are not making equivalent effort within a team, it undermines everybody's engagement and motivation, and making sure that we also don't have levels of conflict which damage individuals. We know that interpersonal conflict in teams is actually disastrous. It's just a disaster. We know that very high levels of conflict about the task can also be very, very damaging, because what for you might be a robust argument that's been very useful might for your colleague send him home feeling really upset and he loses sleep in the night. So we need to be very careful about the individual sensibilities and sensitivities that people have to conflict, and ensure that that conflict or disagreement is cooperative, it's respectful, and has the right kind of interpersonal orientation that enables people to still feel valued and respected and trusted and supported. At the top level, by the way, at top management teams, we need conceptual thinking. We need people, that they're bright enough to run an organisation, that they have the empathy to engage with the people that they leave, and the integrity to act at that level within the organisation, to fulfil what they say they will do, and to be open and honest with people, to have an executive leader self-image, and to be prepared to eliminate from the team people who are behaving badly. Diversity, we know, is hugely important. My friend Sebastian's work on positive attitudes to diversity shows how important in any team positive attitudes towards diversity are. Heterogeneous teams, mixed teams, outperform homogeneous teams when the attitudes to diversity within those teams are positive, whether it's cultural diversity, functional diversity, national diversity, or age diversity, or whatever. And finally, our research has also shown that what goes on in many organizations is a huge amount of activity. And in many teams, there is a huge amount of effort and activity and busyness, but often directed in the wrong direction. So you see, if you like, busy foolishness. People are so busy, but they're not directing their efforts intelligently. And I think it's particularly likely to happen now when we're facing economic austerity, that people think the solution is to work harder and faster rather than to take time out and reflect and say, what are we trying to achieve? How are we going about it? How do we need to change the way we work? If you think of a sports team, what sports teams do is they have a strategy at the beginning, and then at half time they stop and they reflect and think about how to change their strategy. They review their performance at the end of the game. No less should work teams be doing the same. And the evidence that we have is that teams that take time out regularly to review their performance and how to improve it are much more productive than teams that don't. Teams that at the end of their meetings say, how did the meeting go? How could we improve these meetings and make them more effective? Are much more productive and innovative than teams that don't. So it really is important, I think, as leaders, for us to take responsibility to ensure that our teams are having the time out to reflect and learn. So, well, I'm not going to... There are other factors that I think can really help teams to be much more effectively, more effective, which will be familiar to you. We need to make sure that the top team leader is not a narcissist or aggressive or neurotic or paranoid, because these people often rise to the top of organizations. They often rise to the top of organizations. So we need to make sure that we are managing not just downwards but upwards as well, and challenging behaviors that seem to be destructive to the organization. A great deal of leadership is about courage, about having the courage to challenge the behaviors that we think are appropriate, because if behaviors are tolerated within organizations, it sends a message to everybody that it's acceptable to behave in that way. So my argument, or thesis if you like, has been we need to have all of these things in place to create great organizations. And last, I want to just say that I think we need to create organizations where leaders embody the values that they as human beings hold dear, if we're to create effective work communities. Human communities are built around values of humanity and justice and kindness and so on. And I think each of us as a leader in an organization must take responsibility for being clear about our own value orientations and bringing that to our leadership. So we see at core in communities probably 6 core values. The first is around wisdom and knowledge. A value of learning, of wanting to acquire knowledge, wanting to acquire learning in order that we can make a contribution. Not a sponge-like approach to learning, but a powerful urge to inquire, to learn how to do things better, to learn how to run organizations better, to make a difference. And if we as individuals have that value, I think we have to bring it to our leadership. And second is around the importance of courage in leadership and within organizations. The courage to have a vision of the difference that we want to make through our work. The courage of having a vision for the organization which unites people and inspires people. The courage to persist. I think the most underrated quality of leadership is persistence, of keeping going in terms of bringing about the change that we want to bring about. The courage to stand up for what you believe in, to have integrity within the organization, and the courage to be enthusiastic. You know, on a Monday morning when you feel tired and exhausted, the courage to still be positive and enthusiastic. And that does, I think, take a courage to make a choice. And the third is the importance of humanity. Human communities, my area where I live, is built on the kindness of neighbours to one another. And within organisations, cooperation, helpfulness, backing each other up, support for each other is what creates effective organisations. We know this from our studies in many organisations, that cooperative, positive, altruistic cultures produce much better outcomes within organisations. So humanity, kindness is vital. And fourth is around justice, that the role of leaders is to create just communities where people feel treated fairly, equally, where there is a commitment to duty and loyalty and citizenship and teamwork that is valued within the organisation, and that leaders both embody and encourage. And the penultimate value is around prudence, if you like, or temperance, the prudence to be humble as a leader, to have humility. Charismatic, powerful leaders often take us in dreadful directions within organizations. And so there's something about the humility of leadership. I believe that leadership is an enormous privilege for us. And therefore, if we have an awareness of that privilege, we're more likely to approach the role with humility. And the prudence not to kind of be embarking on every initiative we think of and overwhelming our colleagues with ideas. And the prudence when you receive that email that makes you angry, upset, cross, and your face flushes, and you start to type the response on your keyboard with the smoke coming off the keyboard. Do you know what I mean? And your finger poised above the enter button like a guided laser missile to strike the person at the other end. The prudence to say, I'll wait 24 hours. Or 48 hours. Yeah. Or better still, I'll go and talk to the person face to face and deal with it face to face. And then finally, the value of wonder and gratitude and humour and, if you like, spirituality. These things are important in human communities. Gratitude is deeply important. Expressing appreciation, being appreciative of each other, being appreciative of opportunities, being appreciative of the organisation for providing learning and training opportunities, being appreciative of the friendships we make in organisations, being optimistic, having a good dollop of humour within our organisations. I work in a lot in health service organisations in England and United Kingdom and in other countries. The peak experiences of my life, the most spiritual experiences of my life, have taken place in those organisations. That's where I saw my children being born. That's where I lost the people who were dearest to me. And so the values around spirituality and wonder and awe and humour and gratitude are vital in those organisations, but I believe they're vital in all organisations, and that if we are to create really effective organisations, we need leaders who embody the human values that really inspire human communities. Thank you ever so much for listening to me tonight. It's been a real honour. Thank you very much indeed.